Hello, fellow armchair Imagineers. Tiki here,
And Blue Dragon 5.
and we are about to play a game of figuring out the perfect structure of the biopic. That's right. It's time to crack open our Bio-Pictionary. Our Bio-Pictionary. Not just Pictionary. I got myself anyways. Okay, Dragon, this is a big one. This is a really big one. Steve Jobs, 2015. I would say, for my money, I think The Social Network is kind of like the definitive towering. I mean, I know you don't really like, you're not as glowing about that movie as I am. I know you appreciate it, but I think Steve Jobs is kind of like almost the perfect sort of, it's the perfect prequel in a way. It very much kind of like for what The Social Network did as far as, kind of paving the way for the advent of social media and the rise of it and how much it would overtake everything. And I got to tell you, The Social Network really just holds up. There's some eerie connotations with that film nowadays with just how how much things have evolved in the social media landscape 12 years later. And then you got Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs is basically the advent of the technology, like the hardware that created what we would go on to see in The Social Network. So I love this film structure. Dragon, I'm just gonna, for my kind of intro as far as like our thesis in it, you remember the whole thing I say about like, this is a movie.
Yeah.
Well, I actually got that from a YouTuber and his praise of this movie in particular. It was William Bibiani, and he was on the What the Flick YouTube channel. I believe they're now called Breakfast All Day. Very, very good kind of even keel movie reviews. It's honestly one of my most respected sources outside of, the Jeremy Johnson, Chris Beckmans of the world. Actually, I think I kind of appreciate them a little bit more because they kind of lean more into my side of things. Anyways, Bibiani, he laid out like, I was sitting in the theater and I was watching Steve Jobs and I was just thinking to myself, this is a movie. And Draken, that's always just stuck with me. That's just how I describe Steve Jobs is you would not think that this would be as compelling as it is. Aaron Sorkin has a really funny quote where essentially he said he wrote a movie in a box, and Danny Boyle kind of turned it into an amusement park of sorts with just his camera work and everything. So I've always loved this movie. I think it's like basically the perfect framing device as far as a script goes. I've got some pretty interesting things I dug up in the background. Excited to get started on it. All right, we got Koski. He says, "Oh, yeah, good, you chose the good Steve Jobs biopic." Yeah, Koski, of course. We're men of taste.
We're not crazy.
All right, so Dragon, what do you think of Steve Jobs? Not Jobs, but Steve Jobs.
Thank you. Yeah, so with Steve Jobs, the man himself, my history with Steve Jobs, clearly, it's really was always through the prism of, he was one of the founding members of Pixar, of course. Famously you had the triad. You had Lasseter, you have Ed Catmull, and you have Steve Jobs, essentially, the artist, the artist, the engineer, and the businessman. But anyway, so I knew, basically, I knew the look of Steve Jobs. I knew I knew, he has like, there's like the appeal of the successful brand. I kind of knew Steve Jobs through that vein of, this is a guy who who knew quality when he saw it, and he kind of went to bat for Pixar many a times. He fought fervently to protect his investments, like with Pixar. And obviously, of course, I think we all kind of knew, the tragedy of when he passed, which, of course, is kind of what, in the advent of just kind of everyone wanting to know more about the guy, is what gives us the books and which gives us, the movies like this, and to a lesser extent, Jobs.
Yes, to a much lesser extent.
So, So that's the thing. I mean, so I always knew Jobs in a very specific bubble and just kind of in general, like, oh, okay, yeah, he's the guy in the turtleneck who does like he's these, the leader of all the kind of the iPhones and the i stuff. And but again, more importantly for me, he's the third, he's the third spoke in the wheel at Pixar. Okay, but yeah, I mean, this movie, while technically, here's the thing, this movie's very interesting. That technically, it's one of the most inaccurate. If you want to be a stickler, you would say it's kind of the most inaccurate biopic ever made. By the same token, though, it is between what Boyle and Sorkin did, they're going for a movie, not a documentary. They are not
It's a
concerned with
movie, Dragon.
yes, Tiki, yes. They're not concerned with like doing everything verbatim or like I think it was Boyle or Sorkin who said this. It was like this is like looking over their shoulder, looking at a show like, okay, is it like, is it like the picture? Is it like all the documentation? Does it match one for one? Is it like that scene in he didn't say this part. Is it like that scene in The Iron Giant where you're trying to match the two rails together?
I'm pretty sure that was Boyle that you're talking about who said that.
Yeah, I think so. So, by the way, doesn't Danny Boyle, if they ever do a biopic on Danny Boyle, they got to get Mark Rylance to play him, right?
I could see it. Yeah.
So the point being, while the movie may not be like the most accurate biopic ever made, looking every time a biopic comes out, we kind of talked about this all the time. Every time a biopic comes out, you're always going to have the critics always saying, "Well, it didn't actually happen like that. Here's the fact versus the fiction, and here's this."
I love that voice. Here's the fact versus the fiction.
Exactly. So they have that. But yeah, I mean, this is it's a tone setter of the man, if that makes any sense. This is one kind of embodies who the man was, and at least
a tone poem, if you will.
Yeah, sure. It's putting the struggles of his life kind of on display in a very cinematic way, in a very, very well conceived, 3-act structure, Sorkin-esque 3-act structure, and yeah, it's informative in brushstrokes about, like snippets of a man's life. So there's a really good character arc here. And again, not like a full on, like a conventional character arc. Again, it's character arc and just kind of these points of check in that we're kind of filling in our own blanks, and we don't necessarily have all the answers. Neither does he. At the end, I'm a flawed man. Essentially, is what he says. It's like we don't know all the ins and outs. We don't know.
I got to tell you, Dragon. One of the things that really smacked me in the face on a rewatch was the ending. Because I always just remember the ending, it ending on the rooftop with the whole like, yeah, I'm gonna make the iPod. But I did. We'll get there when we get there. But I feel like there's a really ambiguous quality about the actual like shot that they choose to end on that I'm really excited to talk about.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, here with this movie, it's like it's very fascinating. We see a lot of fascinating aspects to Jobs that I never knew about. Just really, this movie was kind of an eye opener to like who Jobs was as a person. Of course, you look into it a little bit further, and again, you see cinematic liberties taken. But at the core, though, the fact is Steve Jobs wasn't just what I perceived in the vacuum of what he was at Pixar. There was more layers to the guy because again, there's a life lived before he ends up at Pixar, which this movie gets to the heart of. Not exactly doesn't spend the whole movie on the garage days like that Jobs movie, from what I understand, but it's this movie.
I mean, I feel like you could make a good movie out of the garage days. That Jobs movie just isn't a good movie.
Sure, it just kind of feels like, hey,
I feel like Brad Bird could do a good movie about the garage days.
Brad Bird can do a good movie about anything.
Yeah, I know, but I'm obviously he can. But I'm just saying, Brad Bird has a real eye for like sentimentality and nostalgia.
True,
and also pushing things forward. I think he can do it. Anyways.
Point being, this is a Hall of Famer biopic that really challenged conventions, and it still holds up. And you go back to this thing, I'm still wowed by it. Like, man, this is very well constructed, despite not being fully accurate, but it's a really compelling movie, And one could say the same about the Chaplin movie with Robert Downey Jr. in terms of, again, it's not exactly verbatim; there are liberties taken, but still cinematically very entertaining, and one could say Oscar-worthy, at least for the performance in that film. And here, Oscar-worthy for the writing. I'm sure. I don't know if it won the Oscar. Tiki, maybe you can enlighten me, but regardless.
Oh shoot! I was all my background research went into the actual like development of the movie. Let me check and see if it did win anything.
It feels like this thing would have at least been nominated for the Oscar, right?
I'm sure it was. It was definitely nominated for Fassbender for sure. Danny Boyle maybe was. I'm sorry, Dragon. You're putting me on the spot. Like I said, I have a lot of good background on the actual
I would hope so.
Of the movie.
Because I had to
Okay.
do a backup deep dive just to catch
Academy
you.
Award nominations. It looks like just Fassbender and Kate Winslet.
Okay, I knew Kate Winslet did get nominated. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
All
right.
Okay.
So Koski also says someone involved in the real life thing said something like, "None of this happened, but it's absolutely accurate."
Yeah,
and I think that's a great way to sum everything up about this movie.
I mean, everyone involved, like, it's so funny that you do like a fact and fiction thing, unless like every answer is no. I was like I did a little cursory looking at, man, everything was no, like not one thing. I mean,
there's one thing that's really true, and that's the whole thing with them struggling to get the computer to say hello. That's like the most accurate thing in the movie.
Yeah.
Like the pressure to do that right before he went on stage.
Yep.
And even then, I'm not sure if the time crunch was as close as they call it.
No, it probably wasn't. No.
So it's
because you got to remember, like, literally the way this is, like, again, it's kind of like Thanos perfect.
This is like literally just like it's like a video game, and it's down to like the 10-second mark.
This movie is very much kind of like the Thanos kind of like the perfect balance sort of thing in terms of like it's like each act is set with 40 minutes on the clock, and it's like it's segmented so beautifully because like it's a 2-hour movie, and it's just like, you know, it's
each act is almost exactly 40 minutes,
and that's the thing, the real life setting of each act is 40 minutes before showtime. So that's an ingenious idea. But anyway, we're talking about the movie before we should do that.
It's basically like 3 episodes of 24.
Sure. So Tiki,
yo.
Dazzle me, background. Let's see if you did anything good here. Come on.
Okay, so yeah, as you mentioned, Dragon, there was a very, very popular biography written in 2011 from one Walter Isaacson, and it was picked up by Aaron Sorkin. Well, it was picked up by Sony Pictures, and Sony hired Aaron Sorkin, who was fresh off of The Social Network at the time. Okay, so initially, well, hold on. Before I get into casting, because there's a crazy amount of casting, I just want to mention that. So one of the big things, the big aces in the hole of this movie that Sorkin got that the biographer did not get was Lisa. He got an interview with Lisa, and he got to spend a bit of time with Lisa. So the Lisa factor, Dragon, that's really, I mean, I'm sure you can probably tell just by watching the movie, but that's really the heart of it. That's really like his interactions with Lisa really was what kind of unlocked everything. Like, he decided from there that the structure was essentially going to be like the heart of the movie was Lisa, and then he kind of focused on sort of razor sharp focus on the the central figures, Wozniak, Joanna Hoffman, John Scully, Andy Hertzfeld. So it was those four, and then Lisa and Chris Ann is kind of like the central figures. And from there, he decided, like, he wanted from the get-go to not have it be a big Cradle from the Grave movie. Like, that was a big thing with him. So he decided that the most iconic parts of Jobs' life were the product launches. And so from there, it really kind of fell into place pretty quickly with the screenplay and the structure. It was pretty easy for him to actually write it. And also, I just want to shout out that Steve Wozniak, he has a really, really great thing where he loves this movie, Dragon. He was on board with this movie from the very beginning. And he's always had a thing against Jobs.
Yep.
So I love that Woz is on this movie's team. All right. So also all of the cast, spent a lot of time with their real life counterparts. Like Kate Winslet, for example, spent a lot of time with Joanna Hoffman. They actually became real life friends. Pretty sure they're still friends to this day. And
do you want to tell the folks how Kate Winslet got the role?
Yeah. She basically just modeled herself up, like had her makeup artist person model her up as the role, as the actual person, and sent it into casting. Like,
I think she auditioned as an unknown, technically, right? She basically is like, "Hey, I'm
right."
auditioning
Yeah,
for the
she
role.
basically vouched for herself, like, "Hey, looky here, I can do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so are you ready for craziness involving like Dragon? I have never, honestly, it kind of blew my mind. Like I knew there were a couple people in the running for the actual Steve Jobs role, but holy crap.
I know who the top two were, but what do you got?
Who are the top? What do you think the top two was? Because there's a lot of different names I have.
Well, for sure. I mean, I don't know if these guys were like the finalists before Fassbender eventually got it, but I think it was DiCaprio and Christian Bale.
Yeah, those would be the top two for sure. Very initially, the top two, like before everything went down with those two names, you had George Clooney and Noah Wyle. And Noah Wyle had actually portrayed him in The Pirates of Silicon Valley. So, okay. Oh my God, there's so many people. Yeah, DiCaprio, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Bradley fucking Cooper randomly at one point. I mean, it's crazy. And then at some point, Christian Bale dropped out and McConaughey came on, and then McConaughey dropped out and Christian Bale came back on, and then Christian Bale drops out again. I mean, Dragon, I'm telling you, like,
this thing was
asking the role of Jobs in this movie was like Michael Fassbender was, believe it or not, a very last minute, like he was one of the last cogs to actually get put into this this machine, if it were. Like he was a very last minute, like who else do we have? Let's see, Fassbender. There we go. He's an up and coming.
We gotta think fast. Wait a minute.
Like it really was like that. That's like Kate Winslet was really locked in very quickly. Jeff Daniels was pretty much the only person who was in the lead for his role. Interestingly enough, Ike Barinholtz was the other kind of big contender for Wozniak. But, I mean, come on, Seth Rogen just absolutely fucking murders the Wozniak role. Like, he murders it with kindness. Yeah, that's a weird way to say that. But, I mean, I have so many nice things.
Rogen, you murdered this role. I thought I did pretty good.
So yeah, just all kinds of crazy casting went down. At one point, Natalie Portman was going to play the role of Chris Ann. I mean, it's crazy, Dragon. It really is just chicanery at its finest. I don't know if I'm using that.
Yeah,
word,
I don't think you're using chicanery, right? Yeah,
but ultimately, it just kind of through it all after the casting got situated. It was a pretty easy ride. They just did a lot of rehearsals. There were a lot of moments where they tried to go over different scenes as many times as they could just to get different elements of performance in there. The best example I can think of that I read about was that in the final big one-on-one scene with him and Joanne, he pulled out the downward dog yoga pose just randomly in the middle of a rehearsal take one time, and everyone just loved it. And
apparently Danny Boyle's directing styles, intense rehearsal, and they really let him kind of like experiment. Because they knew the lines, so I was like, okay, well now they know lines, like let them toy around a little bit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I also love how the idea that this is Danny Boyle's film coming out of 127 Hours, which I mean, that movie was basically his second Trainspotting. As far as Trainspotting put him on the map, and I feel like 127 Hours really made him mainstream. And so it's really interesting because 127 Hours, it's literally just a rock. It's like you're in the crevice of not even a cave, but like a crack in the middle of the earth for the whole movie, and they make it cinematic. So that's kind of what Danny Boyle and Aaron Sorkin were sort of talking about with the whole idea of like Aaron Sorkin like he wrote a movie in a box, and Danny Boyle turned it into a full-blown amusement park. So yeah, okay, I think that's about it, Dragon, unless you have anything else to add. Because for my money, it seems like you basically did your homework for me and just was there to fact check me in case I messed up. I appreciate the confidence.
Yeah. Pretty much.
All right. Well,
Well,
anything to add?
Well, let's see. We probably should mention that if I recall, this did not perform well at the box office.
No, unfortunately not.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things like, wait, didn't they already make a Jobs movie? And I'm like, yes, they did, but this one's so much better. Oh my God, you have no idea.
That didn't come out the same year, right?
No. It was, I think Jobs is something like 2008, I want to say, something like that.
Was it? Wait a minute, 2000. Wouldn't they have done it after he passed, or no?
Oh, maybe. Let me.
Jobs passed. I want to. All right. So
Hold on.
Jobs
it was 2013. I'm sorry. I don't know why.
Jobs passed, I think, in 2012.
So it was 2013. So it was pretty recent. But God, this is like, I remember I had I was actually in college. I was in college at the time I came out.
He went to college.
And I was taking a computer sciences class with this guy that I really, really respected as a professor. And he was like all into the, the history of Jobs and everything. And I tried to get him to watch the movie. I remember like the weekend the movie came out, I was buzzing about like, oh, I can't wait to get to class and tell my teacher about Jobs. He's going to be about Steve Jobs. He's going to be super into it. And Dragon, the man, wrote it off so hard. He's like, no, Jobs was terrible. I can't imagine. I don't want to go through that again. I'm like, but you don't understand, Nathan. You don't understand.
Don't throw Nathan Petrelli at the kid.
I have not done that in forever.
I know.
God, I really pulled that out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Nathan.
His muscle memory. Tiki, I've never forgotten that because I'm always warily, oh God, if we do the whole, Tiki, you don't understand.
Oh God.
It's going to come out.
Yeah, it is muscle memory at this point. Okay, Koski's got a lot of comments. I'm going to go through some of them. Let's see. He says, I think they went with the right guy, but a Ben Affleck, Steve Jobs would be kind of interesting because I can't see it. So I'm like, what did they see in him that screamed Steve Jobs?
Probably, assuming Ben Affleck was maybe one of the many people considered for the role.
I don't think Ben Affleck got very far into. I'm pretty sure it was. It came down to it was basically a 3-horse race between Bale, DiCaprio, and McConaughey.
Well, I remember Christian Bale was announced a lot. It seemed like he was going to play.
Well, like I said, Christian Bale, he signed on, then he dropped out, then he signed on again, and then he dropped out again.
Because when the Steve Jobs movie was announced, all these Jobs movies were on my radars because of the whole, hey, they gave him. I had the dilute. I should probably mention this before we get into. I had the deluded hope that in a Steve Jobs biopic, that would be our gateway to a Pixar biopic, and never came to pass.
Greg, and I feel like we just need to hope for an actual Pixar biopic in order to get any sort of Pixar rep in these things.
Because I will say, on the rewatch, I did catch there are 2 Pixar Easter eggs in this movie, and
is there really? Oh wow,
there are 2 of them.
Okay, really quick, Koski says yes, they did make a Jobs movie, but this is a Jobs movie. Indeed. All right. So we can just kind of dive into it, Dragon. I guess really quick, just not to bury the lead on it. What are the Pixar Easter eggs?
Okay, when we get into Act 3 with when we go to 98, with the big the iMac launch. When they transition, they have the really great transitions between the acts. During that transition, where they go in, basically they're kind of expositing the news thing of Apple tanked until Jobs kind of hold it out of the fire until they bought until they bought Next and everything and all that sort of stuff. You'll see the Pixar Luxo lamp in that news.
Oh, okay.
The other one is this is more you really kind of have to know this one. This one's actually spelled out to me, but when Joel, the reporter, is in Jobs' office, his little nook, wherever he's kind of holed up at, looking through, he has all the stuff on the floor and everything. When he's in that little area with Jobs, there's a book of storyboards. Now, legally, they could not use actual storyboards from A Bug's Life, or I guess possibly Toy Story 2, because it would have been in development at that time. Regardless, there's the storyboards in a binder. So why the heck would Steve Jobs have storyboards? Well, they're for the Pixar movies.
Ah, nice,
Again, they
nice.
aren't actually storyboards from a Pixar movie
Sure.
because they legally couldn't clear them. Because I freeze frame that to try and see is it a Bugs Life?
Nowadays they could clear them because this is a Fox movie.
Yeah, now they
We
could. Sure, yeah. But yeah, there you go. Okay.
need to have Michael Fassbender just reprise his role and have that be the way we get a Pixar movie.
Do you remember who I cast as Steve Jobs in the biopic?
Oh fuck, no, I don't.
Michael Stolbarg.
Oh, that's really funny.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
All right, so speaking of which, Stolbarg, he is I mean,
you've got to
honestly,
try the
Dragon, with this,
Stolbarg.
there's a couple different ways we could approach talking about this. We could go character by character. We could talk about it like based on I don't know. What do you think? I think we should maybe go character by character.
Well, I thought maybe we'd front load with just the 3 act structure and then get into. Well, I don't
So
know.
you want to just kind of talk about like the structure first and then maybe break down character by character as they fit into the structure?
I'd imagine so. Yes.
That sounds good to me. So the framing device in this movie is freaking genius. It really is. I mean,
It's a very
it honestly feels like an everyman's Nolan movie.
Sure. I mean, it's a brilliant way to introduce your 3 act structure of a biopic that's not going to be a cradle to grave story, as we kind of established there. Because, I mean, you have a limited cast, and the idea, like the miracle exception of this movie, like the big miracle exception, it keeps happening, is, like the same thing keeps happening 3 times, but something, obviously, the characters and the interactions are changing with kind of the drama of the story, where it's like, okay, so the same 6 people are in each 40-minute, every 40-minute increment. The day of the launch, only it's very different places of Steve Jobs' kind of like career and his character arcs. That's it almost here's the comparison I have for rewatching the movie. It said it's a little Citizen Kane-esque. Every time we check in with Charles Foster Kane, the narrative it's at a different point in his life. I know it's kind of natural with the progression of story, but just given that story, we kind of go from the young hotshot to the married man to the old man.
I see what you mean. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it's the fact that it's a very specific increment of time and it's recurring and just kind of like it's the old adage of history repeats itself. So I like kind of like looking at it through that vein. We have like the 3 stages of life with 84, 88, and 98. And also, I like the looks of Jobs too. I like that you have like the earnest bow tie to like like the snide man in the tie to the complete humble man, no tie, all turtleneck.
Totally, totally.
Yeah, see, the tie's a symbol, kids. He's reaching for the stars, but when he doesn't have it, doesn't feel like he has to reach for anything. It's all turtleneck. Yeah. But yeah. So again, so basically breaking down the 6 characters that appear in each thing. So I guess let's start with Hertzfeld.
Yeah, so I really think that Andy Hertzfeld, for my money, Dragon, he's meant to be basically the audience surrogate. Did you get that?
I mean, kind of.
I think let me explain that because I basically think he's the audience surrogate in the fact that like he's the man who's working like directly under Jobs, who's really taking the brunt of Jobs his eccentricities and his tantrums and stuff. So like I feel like he's the character where we're really kind of meant to be put in his shoes, if it were.
I had a different read on him, and I wonder what you might feel about this.
Okay.
I kind of viewed him as the new Wozniak. Like Wozniak,
Ooh,
like he's
no,
like
that I could see that. I mean, I don't. That's interesting that you say that. I don't really know if there's any intention in that in the screenplay, but that's an interesting read.
well, based on just the one fact that is very much pointed out in the movie is that Wozniak's whole deal in this movie is that, and it becomes a very dramatic plot point, with the whole boardroom scene is that it's the boardroom waking up and realizing, wait a minute, Wozniak's kind of right. Steve Jobs, he's the idea guy. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's kind of important in the creative
Dragon,
sense,
there's
but
so many parallels in this movie that I could draw between Steve Jobs and Walt Disney.
I mean, with that too, I mean, there's a lot of madmen in the way that works with Jobs, and the fact that that boardroom scene is very basically the Jake Scully of it all. It's very It's very Mad Men-esque, and I love that word. The fact that they were having such an intense conversation about a commercial, that's something you can only get away with on Mad Men. I love that only Aaron Sorkin could really do
Dragon,
that in
that
real
is like
life.
to me like basically the biggest dramatic high point of the whole
Yeah,
fucking film.
exactly. Now, I'm not talking about all that right this second. I'm just saying is
Of
the fact
course,
that
of course.
it's just the fact that this is something kind of threaded through here. And what I'm getting at is that Woz being the guy who's essentially is doing all the technical work, on the hard drive itself, and he's building the computer. And we see here Andy Hertzfeld essentially is again Wozniak is not actively doing that. He's just there as a friend. He's not there actually as like a participatory figure in the company. He is Hertzfeld essentially is doing what Wozniak does. He's technically ordered
Oh,
to fix
okay.
these
So I
things.
basically see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So you're saying that in the first act, Wozniak is basically in the position that Hertzfeld is going to be in the third act.
I mean, I guess, but I was just mainly saying that no, he's literally building the stuff. Well, he's technically doing all the stuff that Wozniak does. Or
Right.
built the
Okay.
computer. Again, Jobs is like the idea man and the motivator, and we see that with Hertzfeld. He's saying, like I'm gonna. He does that awesome the Russian roulette threat, which is a wonderful scene in the movie.
Oh my god, yeah.
And Boyle wanted to use that as the poster, but he felt it was too dark and edgy, where he's doing like the finger gun to the head thing.
I love that.
Seriously, he really wanted to make that into the poster. But yeah,
that's another thing that I love about the screenplay is that how it will it'll take like little moments, like little snippets of conversation, and it's basically like the telltale thing that we always joke about, like Andy will remember that.
Yeah, and he calls that back in the third act. The whole you threatened me once, which again, so you know me, I love Michael Stuhlbarg. You go
this. I'm pretty sure. Like I thought that "Call Me by My Name" was the first thing that I'd seen him in, but I totally forgot that. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, Dragon, he's doing a great job in this movie. He really is. But I feel like there's other people that are kind of like not like their roles are flashier. Essentially, is what I'm trying to say. You know what I mean? Right. So he gets a little overshadowed in this movie, but he's still great, and that's why I kind of think he's a little bit of the everyman, because I just feel like all the other characters in this movie are a little bit more larger than life than he is.
I mean, Stuhlbarg, again, he is he's such a character actor in the best of ways, because he's very much a chameleon in that regard. Like the earliest thing the earliest thing I can remember seeing him, and I loved him in this role. I loved him in Men in Black 3 as Griffin, well, basically he's a kind of a prognosticator of some kind. He could anyway. Point me, I loved him as that character, and of course, every time nowadays he's wowing me. He basically had like a D'Onofrio Kingpin level performance in Dope Sick, and now he's on Your Honor with Bryan Cranston playing the bad guy in The Heavy.
Oh, I forgot about that. Right.
See, season 2 starting right now, right? Yeah, and he's still really good. Anyway,
and then also he was in Bones and All, Dragon, and he was a one-scene wonder, and he was the only thing in Bones and All that was creepier than Mark Rylance, if you can believe it.
Sure. So anyway, so my point is here again. He's like the guy who's being tasked to make it say hello. Or I'm gonna thank everyone from the credits on the screen and everything. And when it doesn't work, and I love he's like poking him in the chest very aggressively. I'm gonna tell him it's because of Andy Hertzfeld. And there's a 1 in 6 chance. Well, it's Russian roulette, buddy. So that's what I'm saying. He's basically in kind of an abusive form of the Steve Wozniak relationship. He's the guy where it's like he's kind of like, if Wozniak never left, he would have become Andy Hertzfeld. That's essentially what that's essentially what I'm saying here.
And then I guess we should probably talk about his role as sort of like in Act 3. There's kind of that rivalry, like the father figure rivalry with him and Jobs for Lisa.
Yeah, because he's a friend of Chrisanne, so he kind of has like a gateway to the.
I love how that's set up too. It's set up very subtly, where when Chrisanne when he first shows up and Chrisanne's talking to him and he's like, "Hey, Chrisanne, how you doing?" She's like, "Terrible," but almost kind of like jokingly.
Yeah, like so friendly.
Like I don't know what else to say, Andy. I'm doing bad.
The only person she's really nice to is Andy. Anyway. But yeah, I mean,
I'm dead. Sorry.
One of my favorite scenes, one of my favorite performances from Strulberg here is, and again, it shows you like, man, everyone underestimates that Strulberg guy because he's so wonderful.
I think he's destined to win an Oscar.
He's got to, right? He really
I
has
think
to.
so.
Every time he shows up, he just dazzles. But just that moment where he has this really poignant moment with Jobs in the third act, where he says, what? Essentially, it's the why do you have why? I'm sorry. Um, Basically, people dislike you. Why do you
Uh-huh.
want people to dislike you? He says, I don't. Basically, I don't care if people dislike me or not. Essentially, is what he says. It's a little better than that. But then Schroeder comes back with him. I've always disliked you. It's a shame because I've always really liked you.
Mhm, mhm.
But just the fact he's just kind of calling him out on that, and then the whole like the fact that he like encouraged the girl to get therapy and the whole male role model thing, and it's the fact that he's calling him
Ooh,
out on
that's one
being
of
a
my
bad
favorite
father.
conversations in the film because it's like I have been through like both the positives and negatives of therapy, so it is kind of like I can see the sort of like the moral middle ground there in that debate. So that I was hanging on every word of
And
that.
I love that it. I love that it takes kind of that, and that's the last scene he shares. I love it takes that
Uh,
somber turn at the end, but before that, it's kind of still very pleasant. You love this guy. He says she needed socks. She needed money for socks, and I'm
what
like,
am I
what?
supposed to do? Just darn her socks?
Then of course we have the whole like like a family what family friend. I was a family friend.
Uh-huh.
Like not
Uh-huh.
trying to insert himself as the girl's father, but I was being a friend.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, it's like they're having the dramatic version of the Curb Your Enthusiasm argument, only it's not a comedy. All right. So I guess like what do you want to take? You want to go Chris Ann? You want to go Wozniak?
I think we should save Chris Ann and Lisa for last.
Okay. So yeah, Wozniak. The thing I want to talk about, particularly in '84, just in regards to all of these characters, I have to get your read on this too, I guess. But it feels like each act additionally has kind of a theme applied to the cycling of characters. Or the theme of Act One really seems to be it's the relationship between Steve Jobs and his creations, the creations of Steve Jobs and the people that made it happen. That's essentially what Act One is. And in doing so, you have Wozniak, in which we get the introduction, the flashbacks to the creation of Apple in the garage, and again, the people that made it happen.
Uh-huh.
So again, essentially, the technological baby, and of course, we have the other baby with the daughter. So it's kind of kind of the creations of Steve Jobs.
Okay, so yeah, Seth Rogen, I think,
Mhm.
just absolutely steals this movie, man. This is, uh, I would honestly like, this is by far his best performance.
My favorite aspect about what Seth Rogen brings this movie, of course, you have the affable Seth Rogen, but it's the fact that his banter and his dynamic with Fassbender in this movie. It feels so natural, and the Sorkin dialogue helps obviously. Just the fact
Uh-huh.
that they can so fluidly kind of shift the dynamic when it's kind of an intense conversation. But by the same token, we have my favorite scene in the whole movie. I think is. I just well sure the boardroom because we all love the boardroom scene, but beyond that, I love the Nixie watch scene. Just the fact that like he's the fact that Steve Jobs is technically fascinated with things. Like I've been dying to ask you about the watch. I want you to show me how it works. And he says like, okay, how do you set it like you're on an airplane? And he basically points out it looks exactly like it's a wrist mounted bomb. I love that. That's what I'm saying. We have some really
But
good
yeah, but
laughs, and
like
then
you
we
said, it's like that very much is like, and it's funny because that scene is happening in the orchestra pit,
mhm.
and in a way, like
We get
it's
the
all
big
about
line.
kind of like the metaphor of the scene is how Jobs, like he conducts the
Mhm.
symphony of the computer or whatever
Because think
for
about this,
him.
Steve. We have that gag, and then like 2 seconds later, and this is like Tone Whiplash, but in the best. This is like Tone Whiplash in the sense of the Whiplash movie. This is like you're rushing and dragging, but in a good way. Yeah,
Sure,
this
sure.
is this is the he. What do you do? We have that really pointed question of, and I love that Joanne is like off to the sides listening to all this too during when these big arguments happen. Like each time, she's always on the fringes listening to this sort of thing. Like what do you do exactly? Because I built everything. You're not. Basically, this is where we confront him with the fact you're not tech savvy. How does this keep happening? It's the old credit battle, like we see with like in comics and everything all the time. In general, it's like it's always everyone. It's the writer versus the artist. The writer obviously has a big hand in things, but the artist with their hands makes it happen. And it's fascinating that we have that thing when Wozniak, we have this running gag where, Wozniak, well, I guess it doesn't run throughout the whole movie. We have that in the flashback, the whole computers are not a painting. And so if you say it again, I will
Fuck
say,
you.
F you, until you either stop or die. So that's the thing. It's you have that run there where again it is kind of an artistry thing, and again he wants credit like a work of art.
Yeah, I love how Wozniak throughout his 3 acts, if you break it down,
Mm-hmm.
Act 1 is very much like he is very much still trying to maintain that, that old friendship and really, really doing like he's looking out for his team more than anything else, but he's got no hard feelings towards Steve, really. And then Act 2 is more kind of him calling out Steve, but in a very private setting. He makes sure it's like a one-on-one kind of thing. And then, Dragon, then we transition to Act 3, and I love how fucking public the confrontation in Act 3 is. That's my favorite. That's one of my favorite parts about the screenwriting of the whole movie overall is how we build to just this very, very public confrontation with everyone in the room.
No one moves,
including the character who's basically the write-in for the press.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Joel. Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. There's just really something like it's almost like it's almost primal how
you're right. Yeah, there's something honestly for me. The bit that really sells it, Tiki, is just the fact that Jobs is like telling everyone, including the press, who's right there, and like there's the pressure. No one moves. He stays right there.
Right. It's just brutal. It's almost like Jobs is kind of like trapping Wozniak into into like a public meltdown or something.
Exactly, and it's basically you've attacked me before. I want on the record you're attacking me again. That I have not I haven't wronged you. And here's the thing though.
Exactly.
Something we should talk about is the fascinating tightrope walk this movie has with the likability of Jobs. Now, of course, a lot of the people that knew Jobs, I'm sure, especially are missing Jobs when they're making this movie. The book, from what I understand, the book was kind of scathing on Jobs, the 2011 book.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I don't know if they haven't read it, but it sounds like it was very much the raw portrayal that is kind of in this movie, where Jobs was not always the likable, soft-spoken guy in the turtleneck that Pixar has very much showcased. And for all we know,
right.
Now I gotta be honest, as far as I'm concerned, that again, this is way obvious. This is when we get to the third act of this movie. You notice he has mellowed considerably from where he was.
Sure, definitely.
And I think the idea is, especially after the daughter scene. Again, I know it's not one for one with real life, but essentially, it feels like over time he became more and more that mellow guy, which is kind of leads to the perception that we get from Pixar, where again he would defend him when Eisner came a calling with the whole Circle 7 thing. But beyond that, it seems like he was a pretty mellow guy, but he dug his heels in when it counted. Which again, we see where all that came from with the past stuff. He was like, yeah, he really dug his heels in. Speaking of which, that's the thing. Jobs, I like that there is an argument for what Jobs is saying, where I think if you look at what Wozniak's asking for here, it feels very much, yeah, it is kind of like what's done is done, all right? Like, why would he credit the Apple II? I mean, it would have been a nice thing, but he is kind of going out of his way, and it's a pressure. If you look at it from a skewed point of view, Wozniak is just kind of this annoyance that keeps wandering into Steve Jobs' life at the most inopportune times, 3 times in the movie. He shows up like, hey, can you credit the Apple II, which is something you're trying to move past? And then it's like, hey, here's a reminder, you're essentially putting out a bad product, and I'm gonna seemingly stand by you to clear the air and just to be there for when the ship goes down. Basically, in kind of a friendly sense, I'm going to gloat when you crash and burn.
Sure.
Because I'm
exactly.
not there and because you didn't listen to me, but he's trying to do it in a polite way. And then the third time, it's like, hey, you're successful again. Bring up the Apple II.
yeah, it's so frustrating.
Yeah.
It's like I think Jobs refusing to do it is like probably Oh, I mean, there's a couple things he says to Lisa that are just like, "What the fuck are you doing, man?"
Yeah,
But you know, but beyond that, it is the most frustrating thing about Jobs' whole character, I think.
I mean, the fascinating thing with Jobs in this entire movie that factors in all these arcs, particularly the Lisa thing, is that Jobs admitting fault is his kryptonite. That is the struggle of the movie, where Jobs, again, in many senses, he is, again, being the smartest guy in the room, being the idea man. He's not wrong, and these things have paid off. But as a character, though, he is wrong, but he won't admit it. Like the Time magazine thing, and Lisa, and for I mean, just the fact that the Apple, the not the Apple II, that the Mac initially kind of it did not sell the million like he said it would. So the fact is, it's kind of like a God bleed sort of thing. If you look at it, kind of the self Napoleonic complex, it's at play here with Steve Jobs. And it's the fact that he's, again, it's the man who's like he's so convinced that he's right, and he's on paper he is right, and he's taking these gambles, and they are paying off in the grand scheme and everything. But still, it's just the fact that him being unable to admit these faults is causing that strife. But again, is he ultimately right because it all works out, or is it, should he have just admitted these wrongdoings? Not wrong, should he admitted that just the faults, like how would have gone?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. And yeah, I gotta tell you, man, it's just really heartwarming hearing Rogen. Basically, the reason why Wozniak appealed to him so much as a character was the fact that Wozniak, much like Rogen, is someone who, he can relate to the whole idea that people sort of felt like they could walk all over Wozniak because he was a nice guy.
Yeah.
And, Rogen and Wozniak really, they have very, very similar vibes to each other. Like, it's actually kind of crazy when you just think of the two of them just offhand through just what you know of them through pop culture osmosis, and they're both just like these big, super likable, cuddly teddy bear people. You know what I mean? So yeah, let's see. Any other things with Wozniak we should bring up? The Lisa thing I think was a big moment for me, where where he was really caught off guard by Lisa not knowing who he was.
Oh yeah, that was very sad. Like, how does she not know who I am?
Mm-hmm. And that, I feel like him trying to talk to Lisa was probably the most that Seth Rogen felt like Seth Rogen in the whole movie. Like, wow, you're supposed to be this big.
Yeah.
All right. So should we move on to Scully?
Well, I mean, do you want to talk about Joanna, or you want to do that after Scully?
I think Joanna would be a good kind of bridge into Lisa. So.
Okay, yeah, sure. Let's talk about Scully.
So John Scully basically is, by all intents and purposes, tell me if you see things differently, but he's more or less the antagonist of the movie.
Again, antagonist.
The antagonist of the movie from the perspective of if Steve Jobs is the protagonist.
Yeah, I mean, sure, but that's what I'm saying. When you look at it,
he's the person who's the most directly opposed to Steve.
I mean, he hurt him the most, so by that logic,
right.
He took his baby away from him, and he's in that sense, he is the antagonist. I mean, yeah. But he's a fascinating antagonist. He's more father figure than antagonist, which makes him interesting. That's the thing. Like all the great antagonists, he's not. That's the thing. Scully, you love Scully. Of course, Jeff Daniels.
Wonderful of course,
certainly.
I much like how I think this is Seth Rogen's best role. I don't know, Dragon. Like Jeff Daniels, he has more dramatic work under his name than Rogen does, but I'm struggling to think of something that I think he's better in. I mean, because I think he has the most explosive performance of the whole film.
I mean, there's this thing he was in that was really good, but I haven't seen it. It's kind of politically driven, so I don't know if you'd like it. He's in the Comey Rule. But yeah, he's really good in that. But yeah, no, you're right. This is probably a Hall of Famer. This is probably the best thing he's done, though. But yeah, that's the thing. So it's a well-rounded role. So this guy essentially was Steve Jobs' his father figure. He's the fact that he is he in the role of creation, in the role of kind of like the creation thing with the first part. Again, he's kind of facilitating the creation. He was if I remember, if I recall, the idea is he was kind of the figurehead for Apple. If memory serves, like Steve Jobs. Again, in creating the Apple computer, Steve Jobs again really had no idea how to run a company, so this guy was kind of brought in to help kind of build it up as like a kind of an official business. And he was kind of like basically Jobs whispered to the guys here, and then over time he basically the board, because that's how business works. Sometimes you build a board, and they're going to have rule over the guy, even though he created the company. They're going to vote a guy out, which is what happens essentially.
Hey, Chapek.
You get it.
Chapek's just over there like, yeah, I've been there. I know how it works.
Like, not exactly like kind of a Walt Chapek per se, but okay. Regardless.
Dragon, I keep telling you though, like honestly, I feel like the Chapek situation, you could make a movie out of like the literal night that Chapek got fired. Yeah. And basically make it real time and have it be super accurate and super compelling.
You know we have to do an introduction on Chapek where he's just walking all happy-go-lucky.
Oh my god!
And here's the thing: you do it like imagine like a menacing Kingpin shot, only it's goofy. Okay, so you have like
I can't wait for the Elton John concert tonight.
So you have like a camera looking up from him, so you see all the girth and everything, and he's just kind of walking down, looking left and right, like he's smiling. He's like the happiest guy.
He's got the beard.
Did he have the beard during the?
Yeah, he still has the beard. Yeah.
Wait, it must be a depression beard.
right.
Why didn't it work? Anyway,
I think the man will be fine.
Yeah,
I have no sympathy for him.
Okay.
Have you heard how much money he got?
He got to keep that money, I'd imagine, yeah.
It's crazy how much money he got. I don't even want to talk about it.
Anyway.
I'm struggling to make ends meet. Anyways.
Yeah, point being, yes, I like the adoption runner with Scully, and the fact that he is playing. Obviously, fatherhood's a big thing in this movie because we have it.
I feel like he uses the whole like, "Oh, I'm your father figure, Steve." Like it almost kind of vaguely feels like Sorkin was sort of channeling like an Emperor and Vader sort of dynamic with that.
Yeah, and remember, Hertzfeld gave voice to that. So Hertzfeld with the whole father thing connect is kind of seated in there from when we kind of turn on its head in the third act there, where he's the one who bet him like $100. He changed the thing there, and he warned him that becoming his father figure could be dangerous. Yeah,
so that scene, the big scene where we're essentially cutting back and forth between three different key moments. I mean, holy crap. Like, I can't believe this movie didn't win Best Editing this year.
How great was it when I still love this visual? I love this setting for this argument. I love they're like this hallway with all the chairs that are put up in the opera house, and just kind of walks by and he says, "This is why I told you you need a good security team."
right. I love that setting with all the chairs stacked on the tables.
Yep. Oh yeah.
And also, I really find it funny that like the Social Network's most dramatic scene also happens in a boardroom when it's raining outside.
It just works, doesn't it? Doesn't it just look?
It totally does. I feel like it's a Sorkin staple. Like, all right, the dramatic high point, we gotta have rain.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of the low of lows, so it's got to be the heavens are crying upon this moment.
Right. Yeah. Even the Social Network. Do you remember they even like literally call it out? Like Zuckerberg's so distracted, he's like, "Mr. Zuckerberg, do I have your full attention? It's raining outside."
My favorite
started raining.
My favorite detail is I love these ticked off that his baggage is like in Beijing.
right.
To get hoisted off the plane, but yeah. So we have the idea that.
But I one of my favorite moments, from his perspective, is that call of like, John, if you get on that plane, you're not going to have a job when you land, and it's like, okay, holy shit, this guy is under a ton of pressure.
Oh yeah. That's the thing. And again, well, to be fair, it wasn't necessarily a threat. That was more like he's calling for a vote. So basically, if you don't get there to defend your position, you're out.
Yeah, but I mean, still, it's it's very much like pressure at the least.
Well, definitely ruined his plans, his travel plans. But yes, so that's the thing. So we have this dynamic where you have like a really kind of nice kind of friendship, and the idea during each of these launches, he would bring the 55 Margot.
Oh yeah, right.
And
I love how one of my favorite beats of the performance there is like Jeff Daniels, he does not like the cadence of his delivery of the two lines back to back is like exactly the same. He doesn't change a beat. He's like, this is a 1955 Margot. And Jobs is like, it's 9 a.m. This is a 1955 Margot.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, did you hear what I just said?
I mean, I love him getting us to the boardroom scene. The commercial plays a huge role.
Paul Giamatti should have been cast in that scene just as like a gopher or something, giving them the wine. Like, yes, gentlemen, this is a Margot, and it's much better than Merlot, because, Steve, you should not be drinking any fucking Merlot.
All right. What big?
One more year, baby. One more year, and we'll be doing the Sideways 20th.
All right. So seriously, I love the fact that we use, again, one of the other things I knew from Apple, because I knew very little about Apple as a company at the time before I watched this. I famously, I think pop culture, we all knew about that random commercial where it's like,
yeah, I definitely knew about the commercial. I knew about a lot of the marketing stuff. I did know Scully's name. I think I probably knew a little bit more than you did, since I was studying computer sciences at the time. Yeah. But anyways,
just the fact that you had like that infamous, well, I guess just the iconic commercial where it's like
they were skinheads, Steve.
Were skinheads on my payroll? Are we paying skinheads?
I love how that whole thing like evolves from just like an offhanded, like, it's almost like something that you would just bring up in conversation just to fill a silence. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yes, and it came back. Then
it evolves into like the most dramatic conflict of the whole film.
So basically, what we do is we have like kind of a nice thing where they're kind of reminiscing about the commercial and everything. Well, it's a nice commercial. It just doesn't really have much to do with the product. It's a nice commercial, and then of course it escalates to him calling him out on, you tried to can that commercial. And then of course he brings up the whole thing about how the board basically, after the Mac did not perform, they tried to kind of salvage as much money as they could, which basically showed a lack of faith in Jobs, which really hurt his feelings. And basically it was a crack in kind of the father-son arm, which probably motivated like Jobs turning on him in the first place. They finding out the commercial betrayal there, which again, it shows you Jobs cared about the selling of the idea. And, like,
he absolutely did.
To the idea.
Like the commercial is very much kind of like, it's very reminiscent of like his visions for Pixar. It's like he was a visionary guy.
Yeah, he lost
in an artistic sense.
In the beginnings of Pixar, he was losing like I forget if it was in total $5 million or it was $5 million a year on Pixar. But back when they were doing shorts before Toy Story happened, it was like $5 million a short, roughly, I think, or at least in total it was 5 shorts of $5 million. However, that broke down. Regardless, yeah. So it's the fact that we kind of have that, and then we have that betrayal of like basically he's trying to outs him, so there's going to be, because he feels betrayed, which ultimately backfired tremendously, where his baby was stolen from him right there because of his own arrogance.
Yeah.
And then of course that whole thing of well, Scully, it's just a tragedy what happened to him. It's the fact that he went down in history because he was forced into it. I'm the man who fired Steve Jobs after he then turned everything around. Our company.
He's actually still pretty active on YouTube, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah, like just doing kind of like basically business type stuff, like how to get into business.
All right, so kind of like not. So I'm trying to think. I think no, not him. Sorry, I'm keeping thinking of the wrong businessmen here because I know there's. I'm thinking like Bernie Madoff, which clearly that's not it. Oh, Warren Buffett. It's kind of like Warren Buffett.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, Warren Buffett's like the good money guy. Anyway, I hear he's really nice to meet. By the way,
I imagine so.
Yeah, he's like he met the Albuquerque-verse cast
really
on a couple occasions, and he does this gag when he meets people. I wonder if you ever heard about this. When he meets people, he poses for pictures with them. What he does is he pulls out his wallet, so he makes it look like they're fighting over his wallet.
Yes, I have heard of this. Yes.
It's adorable. It's freaking adorable. Anyway, yeah.
I just want to shout out Koski really quick. He says, a lot of people like this. There's a lot of people like this. Like, yeah, their flaws, that they're arrogant and they always think they're right, but it's frustrating because it's not like their arrogance comes from nowhere.
Yeah.
He also says Jeff Daniels gives a very subtle and dramatic performance in the obscure indie film Dumb and Dumber.
Lloyd, just when you've done something stupid and I can't believe it, you go back and they totally redeem yourself.
All right.
Yeah. But yeah, it's sad what happens to him because he loses everything. And of course, the Newton thing, and they have the whole stylist thing, the things we could have done. It's
I
bittersweet.
love that is the last line from him.
Yeah, it's really there's some actual subtlety there with Jeff Daniels. Him just going
totally.
just the sorrow in that, and the fact that again, I love that in that moment. The biggest thing we should talk about, Tiki, is the adopted father thing. Not the biological father, the biological father.
Oh my god,
thing where we have the reveal that because he brings up the adoption thing through him a couple times because of Hertzfeld just kind of like making the $100 bet that he's going to change it because he's got adoptive issues, and just the fact that he feels like what could have 1 month. It's so sad and honest the conversation they had. Obviously, the one in the third act never really happened because they severed contact completely after the board meeting. So this was a liberty they really took here. It was like, what if they did have a chance to mend fences? With the kind of the more Zen like Steve Jobs, I could buy that happening. Where he's like,
Did you know that there's a biopic out there that's basically about that same premise, but with Lennon and McCartney?
No, I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, it's kind of like it kind of sounds like it has like a one night in Miami vibe where it's like
cool.
Basically like Lennon and McCartney. Actually, I'm pretty sure I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure the premise of that movie is that they're meeting to talk about the potential of the Beatles reuniting on SNL, which is a thing that was actually like thrown out as a possibility before Lennon got assassinated. So yeah, God, I should look into that movie. That actually sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it does sound interesting. Yeah.
All right. Anyways,
just the fact that we have this really brutal conversation where he's kind of talking about the whole like Steve Jobs always felt rejected because there was like his mother had like a thing where he had to be adopted by an educated family, and because of that he was kind of like basically returned after a month, which always messed with his head, and that's why ultimately.
Yeah.
Basically, Steve Jobs fundamentally, what we're putting out in this movie is fundamentally Steve Jobs' his main flaw is that he wants to control things because he was adopted and that was out of his hands. And we learned that when he and Scully met, when he was the ex Pepsi Cola executive and everything, they had lunch.
Scully was behind the Pepsi Generation campaign, which pretty much single-handedly gave Pepsi like the status that it still has as like the number one competitor to Coke. Yeah. So like Scully is like a marketing madman. Like he's a maverick when it comes to.
Yeah, I love that, Tegan. That's honestly the Pepsi Cola aspect with Scully is the most Mad Men thing in the movie. I love most because they would always talk about like Coke was always like in Mad Men. Coke was like the top of the heap. Is in like if you can get Coca-Cola.
That's cool. That's funny.
That's like a runner throughout the show of like.
I still subscribe to the theory that Coca-Cola basically invented the modern day image of Santa Claus.
Yeah. Anyway,
I still like they didn't invent the concept of Santa Claus, but they invented the modern day image of him.
Again, that's probably disputed, but sure. No, it's a cool. Yeah, it'd be interesting if it.
It's a theory.
Yeah. So the other like one thing that actually happened in this movie, believe it or not, I forget if Scully was there or not, but like Steve Jobs going to the restaurant where his biological father worked, but he never told him. That's real life.
Oh wow! Okay,
that was like the other thing. That and the hello thing, but that was like legitimately because they thought it was a bug and they doubted it, but like no, that did happen. He would visit his father at the vegan place, and he And yeah, he never told him. And I love the exchange between him and Jeff Daniels when he says, like, did you ever tell him? He says, no, I was afraid he'd find a reason. Basically, he was afraid he'd find a reason to sue me. That's essentially what he said. He would just
I love the pity. I love the pity in Daniel's voice there after he says that, like, oh, Steve.
I know it's this. I love that.
Yeah, I totally picked up on that too. Absolutely,
it's fantastic. Anyway, yeah. So let's move on to. I guess you want to briefly talk about the report. You want to talk about Joel?
I don't necessarily think we need to. I
Only
kind
one
of
bit I
view.
want to talk about with
Go
Joel.
ahead. I kind of view him as basically like essentially the same. He kind of serves the same purpose as Bobby Cannavale's character in I, Tonya, where he's
Yeah.
pretty much like the stand-in for the press.
Only he's like we set up that Jobs hates the press except for this guy, essentially.
Uh-huh.
Now Joel here, my favorite part with Joel is in kind of Act Two, where basically we call Act Two. I think overall is the bluff. That's kind of what I would call it's the bluff and kind of the ego of Steve Jobs. It's essentially what's on display in Act Two, because that's what we get with the boardroom scene where he thinks he's going to bluff them into letting go Scully, and that obviously doesn't work. And just the whole thing, the fact that the what he reveals to this reporter is that the cube is not finished or fully functioning yet, and that is off the record, so we can tell him all of this. And it's not going to have any ramifications. I love that idea, and he's just going out of his mind. Wait, what? Really? How is that? It's a golf cart.
He is so thrown off by it.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I love that. That's a very effective use of that character. I thought that was great. Anyway.
Uh-huh.
Okay, yeah. So who do we? I guess we want to talk about Joanna next.
Yeah,
right?
let's talk about Joanna Hoffman, and then we'll transition into Chris Ann and Lisa at the end.
Yeah.
So Joanna Hoffman, I think, is she's the other character who you could kind of almost see as not necessarily the audience surrogate, but I feel like she's almost more of a protagonist in this movie than Jobs himself, if that makes sense.
I mean, Kate Winslet debatably does steal the movie. She's very much the heart of the movie. I think she's the heart of the movie. I think we could.
She absolutely is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Lisa's the kind of the heart of the idea of the movie and what the movie's going for. But as far as the actual performances go, she's definitely the heart for sure.
She's like the heart of it. She's like the character arc mainly with Lisa. I think Lisa's kind of like she's a very key aspect, very core.
Well, like I said, Dragon, Lisa's the heart of it, especially in the sense that like, if Aaron Sorkin hadn't talked with the real Lisa, this movie might not have shaped out the way that it did, you know?
Yeah. So I mean, you gotta remember that. Well, again, I'll say it when we get to Lisa. But anyway, back to Joanna. Yeah, but Kate Winslet, she impresses, and she's basically kind of like the Polish angel of mercy to Steve Jobs. Essentially, she's keeping everything running on time. She's the gal Friday. She's really great at that role. And
but I love how throughout the movie it's almost like a death by 1,000 cuts. You know what I mean? Because like she's like her and Jobs are very much like in sync and a team, and Jobs isn't doing anything specifically to her, but she's just kind of taking in how he's treating other people.
Yeah.
And I love how that just kind of subtly builds and builds throughout the movie.
Yeah, it's like if you look at like in the beginning, if Act One's like about Steve Jobs' his creations, then Joanna here, she's basically take care of them. That's essentially what she's saying. Like, take care of them. She's marveling at the bluffs in Act 2 and Act 3. She's like a call to action. Like, hey, deal with this.
Totally.
Yeah.
And she's definitely kind of like the bridge between Jobs and Lisa. Like she's very much. I love the relationship that she has with Lisa. There's not a ton of screen time there, but like in the little screen time you get a lot of sense of like, you know, like everyone has that one coworker friend of your parents who is basically like a fixture in the family, right? Like It's kind of how I view it as. Of course, the most memorable bit is the whole like, "Hello, Lisa. When we saw you last, you said the way I talked was your favorite, and that's the best thing anyone's ever said to me." Or so I'm butchering.
Okay. Essentially, what she said was, "Hello, Lisa. We met before, or I guess last time we met, you said you liked the way I talk, and that was my favorite thing anyone's ever said to me."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is great. And then the other line is, "We're trying to make a computer say hello. Why don't you come with me?" Again, it was really sweet. Yeah, honestly, we'll get into it. I think honestly the most stable mother-esque figure that she had in the movie.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So speaking of which,
all right. So let's briefly talk about Chris Ann. I love the ambiguity, the moral ambiguity with her.
Yeah.
Because it's like you really, really do see both sides of it. Like you see the side of I mean, first of all, I think the most reprehensible thing Jobs does by far in the whole movie, I think, is just the straight up going into the whole thing of him refusing refusing to believe that he's Lisa's father for a vast majority of the runtime.
Yeah.
And of course, the brutal, like the Lisa thing of like, it's just a coincidence. Like, that is the biggest asshole.
The coincidence thing is really harsh.
That's the biggest asshole move of the whole movie for me, I think.
And we know it's made up because later on he admits that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Those four, he pulls like a glass onion. So those things don't even track. They don't even make sense.
Exactly. Right.
But yeah, it is.
But with Chris Ann, it's like, I totally get like where she's coming from at the start of, like, you're on track to become basically one of the richest people on earth, and I'm basically living in a slum. And I do like that Jobs, there is like, I don't know, he does give her the money, but you get the sense that he is kind of holding it over her head. And I love the imperfection of the whole thing. I love how it's like there's no good guy or bad guy in that thing. In a sense, they're both kind of shitty parents.
Yes, I do feel, and again, this is the feeling, mind you, and I like that they play it ambiguously, but I don't know, maybe I'm projecting a little myself here. I don't trust Chris Ann, and I understand why.
No, that's absolutely the vibe. Yeah, for sure.
And that's the thing, and again, it feels
I think
like
the biggest clue that I get is the whole thing about the waking her up thing.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, T, when you think about it, and I think possibly, and again, I think ultimately it's just the whole parentage thing, the whole like DNA testing thing with the daughter, the whole doubts of her being his daughter. I think ultimately that's just his ego saying, I don't want something that's out of my control, again, which is his character flaw, and he's projecting that onto her, which is why he's so digging his heels in the hole. She's not my daughter, and trying to use science, trying to use science and statistics and math to get out of the whole 28% thing.
Sure.
Again, that's just that's his character flaw. By the same, I think now I don't think this is what's motivating him to get to that place. I don't think this is why he's doubling down on that, but I do get the sense if you look at that, like, it's less a control thing. It's more of like there's something clearly kind of skeezy about this lady. She's showing up at these points where I'm successful, lumping all these problems on me now versus beforehand. And he is paying child support. He is giving her money because it's court ordered. He's doing what is asked of him by law. So he's not dodging her at all here. He's just kind of a bad father ultimately. But again, he's not really super in the wrong here. But she is coming to him saying she's sleeping in a park. Well, why is she sleeping in a park? You're not spending money the right way. This is.
I get the sense that there's drugs involved.
I know, that's the thing. She comes across as a druggie with a story. That's kind of what she comes across as. And all of this,
especially the whole thing about her having like the same sinus infection or whatever it is.
I mean, the fact that she
spent 12 years ago, that's super sus.
It's really sus that she spent $1,500 on like a spiritual cleansing of a house. It sounds
that's
like.
Absolutely sus. Yes,
that's
just straight up wrong.
By the way, a house that she then sold in down the line.
Right.
But yeah, the fact is, like, I understand Jobs not trusting her, but clearly I think his ego is the main thing. It's kind of like front loading that before it's like the logic. Okay, clearly this woman is not to be trusted. And to me, my read on looking back in the movie, my read on the Lisa dynamic as a little girl is that he's bonding over the whole Mac paint thing with her, which is a really sweet scene. It's a really good scene. I think in that moment, what you see Fassbender do, at least my read on has been, he in a sense is choosing again versus the stuff that's out of his control, like a court telling him this is your daughter, like you have to accept that you slept with this woman, and whether it was a mistake or not, looking at the wreck that this woman is, you have a child and you must take care of her. But I think it's kind of him choosing, much like he always wanted to be chosen. I'm going to adopt this child. I think that moment, and again, it's kind of sadistic when you think he's doing it because she liked the product that he built. But still, it feels like I am choosing this. I am choosing to support and adopt this child and take her in as my daughter. But so again, he's kind of on his own terms. He's kind of rewriting his own story of adoption through this girl. It feels like, so he'll never admit that she's his biological daughter. but she's my daughter. So that's the way we can kind of have the father daughter scenes, but not him fully admitting that he's wrong, which again is his main hang up for that movie until the third act.
Mm-hmm.
Does any of that make any sense? Or
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, he's fixing a problem. He's fixing a flaw. He feels like in the machine that is his life.
So in the second act, I really like the whole idea of, you have to talk to her, you have to engage with her, and that's really the thing that kind of like it's a very subtle thing in the screenplay, but I think it's one of the more important moments is when he does start to open up to her about the different versions of the song and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, think about that. That's Joanna's advice, where Joanna said, she's asking you the same question over and over again because she wants you to talk about stuff that you like. She wants to talk to you, so because she's afraid, and she's afraid of all the tension in the air between mommy and daddy, essentially. And yeah, that.
As a child of divorce, I know that feeling all too well.
Yeah, so it's very accurate then. So so that's kind of leading to the bridge of conversation with song, and again they're talking about music, which is inspiring in the back of his mind the iPod and how that whole thing works. And again, she has the Sony Walkman, which apparently in real life, and they kind of made it in a joke in the movie, and it's fine. It's just the fact apparently in real life he really liked the Sony Walkman, so this was kind of like him poking fun at it, but as a bridge to the iPod. So, but it's just it's a nice kind of run there. How sad was it at the end, where she hugs him and she's, I want to live with you.
I think it's the most sad moment in the whole movie.
And this is the subtlety. We spoke of subtlety earlier with Jeff Daniels, which is great. But I mean, the subtlety on what Fassbender's doing. We have two scenes that really call this out. That scene right there where you see him melt despite him just having that distance between everything. But the biggest example is when after the scene, I believe it's after the scene with Hertzfeld, he's in the office and he's trying to concentrate on work. And he just can't because he had those little flickers, little flashes of his daughter, and it's parenting expressed visually in the editing. It's just the fact of like you're trying to focus on this one thing, but it's like my daughter, my kid.
Mm-hmm.
It was very well done. You see seeing such a smart guy becoming unfocused and untethered, who seemingly has it all together despite all the chaos that's going on. Because think about it, Act 2. See, Act 1 is him just struggling to make it to the top and being very persnickety about every little thing. Like it needs to be a white shirt with a pocket for the blue floppy disk.
Right.
And in Act 2, he's on his heels, but he has a heck of a poker face because that's the bluff. Because again, he's like, everything's fine because he knows everything is terrible, but no one's going to find out about that. And when that happens here, he, she asked him about regrets, which then, of course, it transitions flawlessly to the Scully scene, where it's about the regret that he has with Scully, but he won't admit that regret.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Of course, Act 3, that brings us to kind of our ending of the movie here. We have like the wizened Steve Jobs, who is very zen. He's admittedly a father now, but he's still a ticked off father.
I love how
sold that house.
I love how Steve Jobs in Act 3 is. Like, as Joanna Hoffman very pointedly points out, he won. This is Steve Jobs. This is like basically the start of Steve Jobs being kind of like the public deity who can do no wrong. Could you basically, like launch? I mean, if you really think about it, Dragon, like it's crazy to think how much just the invention of the iPhone. Like, I mean, it's cosmic. It's just as big as like the invention of the internet in some ways. You know what I mean? It's just, it was a cosmic shift.
The iMac, I mean, it's the most nostalgic thing in the movie, at least for me. I mean, our generation particularly, we saw those things in school, right?
Okay, you know what? One of my favorite, I love when he's doing the little the demo at the start of Act 3. I love the audience's like enthused reactions to like
the little
and
door.
You can see through it. And look, there's a cabinet for the ports. Look at it. It's a little shelf. It's a little door.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I'm very nostalgic for that as well. I remember when my middle school library first got him, and it was like, oh man, this is high tech now.
For sure, yeah.
Are you there? I feel like I lost you.
No, I'm here, Tiki. But
Okay.
no, I agree. It's very nostalgic for sure. Like when you saw those things, it's like, man, this why as a kid I was thinking, why blue? I wonder why blue. you know? Yeah, it was a very interesting, like the whole see-through design aspect of it all, but it was like fancy.
How about that for a compromise? Was you can see into it, but you can't get into it.
yeah. So I suppose it's kind of funny. Like Apple itself starts in a garage, and we end on top of a parking garage with our movie.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so we should probably talk about like the big 1,000 songs.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a whole lot to say. I just think it's a nice kind of endpoint. I have more to say about the actual ending.
Well, right, but I don't know. I like the fact that the whole movie has been set again with the whole ticking clock thing. Is the whole like he says no, we do not start late, and he's willing to start late for his daughter.
Oh yeah,
To
for
make
sure. That's definitely a nice subversion by the end. Definitely.
And again, the 1,000 songs in a pocket thing, I just love how it just kind of embodied the creative process and just like an innocent, like, idea that was kind of like a father daughter moment. The whole, like, my favorite bit in the acting there is all 1,000 songs. Okay, maybe 500 songs. Between 500 to 1,000 songs, it'll be right there in your pocket.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love the realism of that dialogue. Yeah.
yeah. Anyway,
Okay. So that last shot, man, where it looks like he's walking. Okay, this is how I read the last shot. And I could be totally reading it wrong, but for it's basically him on stage, introducing the iMac, and like the last shot is him like walking towards her from backstage, and we're almost like in a point of view shot from her perspective.
hmm.
And it's almost like he's beckoning her on stage or something like that, or like he's about to pull her onto the stage. And my whole read into that is that this is like the moment where his family life and his work life, his professional life, kind of finally come to that intersection.
What's interesting because yeah, we ultimately did not see her get pulled on stage, but he's walking over there, and I mean, I guess I
I'm
kind of
willing
like.
to bet the reason why we didn't see her get pulled on stage is because it probably didn't happen in real
Well,
life.
no, clearly. Well, T also is the fact he had like 3 kids, so they focused all that
Right,
on her.
right, right. Yeah.
That too, because I think technically at each point in this, or at least through the '90s, is like, hey, kid. It's like, so if you really want to pull the strings, then you have okay, well, the illegitimate kid's the most interesting one, but at least the in quotes illegitimate kid's the most interesting. Right. But no, honestly, I kind of read it more just visually what they're doing as he was kind of becoming an icon right before our eyes, and just kind of walking into
That too, for sure,
like
for
he
sure.
walks into a fade out. Like we fade again. We kind of have
Right,
him in a
right,
clear
right.
picture, and again, with the fact that she's looking at the thing that she drew. I love she completely forgot about what she drew on the uh, on the Mac, the
Uh-huh.
Mac Paint, and yeah, she was kind of touched by. Oh, I printed it out. I loved it. Yeah, it was
All
nice.
right. Any final thoughts?
I mean, in general, man. Again, like Steve Jobs really just speaks for itself. It's got a solid 3 act structure. We pay everything off. Again, we use every part of the Buffalo. Is it accurate? Heck no. Is it great? You betcha. Love it. Are all the performances A grade? Yes, they are. I'm glad you asked. Thank you. I it's I mean, again, this is a good celebration of Steve Jobs. I mean, a part of me just wants Steve Jobs well represented. If we ever do like I don't need a Steve Jobs Cradle to Grave movie, but I would like one of these days to show Steve Jobs' involvement in Pixar in a biopic. I've always wanted that ever since the beginning, and we've had 2 Jobs movies. This one clearly the far superior, better one. But yeah, it's
We
again
all
this.
know the Pirates of Silicon Valley is the one true Steve Jobs movie.
Again, it's the fact this one was really the big shakeup, and like let's one of the big shakes, but a shakeup in structurally we had not seen up to this point. Of like, yeah, let's do the biopic differently than the usual affair. That
Yeah,
was
I love how it's both a 3-act structure and then it's also like kind of experimenting with the whole real time kind of plot structure at the same time. It's
yeah.
really interesting. It's almost kind of like different layers of the plot structure. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to give a big shout out to Koski Productions for joining us the whole stream. Some really, really thoughtful comments along the way. He also says, I request Man on the Moon for this biopic series. I know you talked about the documentary, but I kind of want to see you guys talk about the actual movie. Dragon, I definitely think we'd be willing to talk about that, right?
Oh, I do love Man on the Moon, so yeah, we can.
All right, for sure. So I can't guarantee that it's going to be the next thing on our docket, but I definitely think that we can add it to the list for sure. All right, folks. So thanks for watching. Have a good night. See y'all later. It wants to say hello.